Good morning, guys. Welcome to another episode of Wake Up and Show Up, episode 6. Cara here. We are just going to wait for Lauren Borden, Dr. Lauren Borden, to join us on this glorious Monday. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Monday. Trying to raise some vibrations here after a very long week. Good morning, guys. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Drop your name. I see Taylor. What's up, girl? I see Mrs. V. Clark. Where are you guys tuning in from? Are you in New York, Taylor? Good morning, guys. We are just going to wait for Dr. Lauren Borden to join us. This is another episode of Wake Up and Show Up. We are live every Monday at 10 a.m. Good morning, Rashida. Hey, Lauren, girl. I see that request coming in. Good morning, ladies. Just waiting for Lauren to hop up. Let me know where you're tuning in from. If you're drinking anything, I got some coffee. Oh, good morning, hair.
Oh. Morning. Oh, I know. It's aggressive. It's aggressive this morning.
You look good.
How are you?
Good.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Good. I see we got some New York in the house, and we got some North Jersey in the house joining us. So as people hop in, I'm gonna, this is the pin the comment here situation. So let me do that. But what's up? Talk to us. How's Florida? I know you said it was humid out there, right?
Oh, girl. I'm trying so hard not to be like grouchy about it, but it is so humid. There's like a tropical storm moving through, so it's particularly aggressive right now. But otherwise it's beautiful. We had a really beautiful day yesterday, and I went to the beach, which was so needed.
Was it a lot of people?
Yeah. There were a lot of people at the beach. I gotta tell you, we're not doing a whole lot of social distancing down here. That's
not good.
But
that's kind of scary.
Yeah, a little scary. But I kind of kept I was like very deliberately like staying at the edge of things, and that was like my approach to it. That's the first time I've been here for like a month, and that's the first time I've gone to the beach. But yeah, it's like, it's nice. It's really, really nice. I'm still waiting for you to come down here. I would love to have you.
Listen, I'm trying to figure out what these travel details is looking like. I know my sister is talking about going to Virginia Beach, like with the family. I'm like, all right, guys, you guys are doing a lot here. Good morning. Good morning. But no, I'm getting out there. I'm coming out there to Florida, so.
I love your like red, white, and blue. Was that intentional?
It wasn't. It's so funny. So I had a different shirt on, literally like 4 minutes before hopping on live. And I didn't like the way it was falling when I sat. So I was like, oh, let me change my shirt. And so this was the only one that was actually, I didn't need to iron it. So I pulled it out the closet and I put it on. And I was like, oh, great. Red, white, and blue. This is nice.
No, it's perfect. I also did the same thing. I almost texted you like, wardrobe change. I don't know. This is it. Whatever I'm doing right now isn't working, but it's cute. So did you pin the topic?
Yeah, just put episode 6. We didn't name this one. So I'll name it after. But yeah, I pinned it. So good morning, guys. As mentioned, welcome to another episode of Wake Up and Show Up. Lauren and I, Dr. Lauren Borden and I, are here every Monday at 10 a.m. Just to talk about life, to set us up for the new week, but then also just to unpack some things that are maybe we're personally experiencing. And as we know, coming off of the heels of such a very intense past 2 weeks, honestly, with the death of George Floyd, still campaigning a lot for Breonna Taylor, for justice for her, Ahmaud Arbery, and just the Black community overall, and just, having more equality in the world for everyone. So, coming off of that, it was a very very intense week. And Lauren and I connected over the last week and was just talking closely about a lot of things. We had a panel last Tuesday actually called Your Life, Your Term. So if any of you had the chance to join, would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. And if you didn't, you can click the link in my bio to watch the replay. But it was Lauren and myself and 3 other amazing women, all completely different backgrounds. And we just got together to talk about the bravery and courage to show up in times that are super critical for us, that could really create the change that we want to see in the world. And I thought it was so perfectly aligned, Lauren, because honestly, we planned to do this panel like months before everything got so intense, and it literally fell on Blackout Tuesday, which was very interesting and very much aligned.
Yeah, I don't know if we've really spoken on here about what that looked like, but Cara and I were really, so we connected back in September because we recognized how aligned our businesses were in terms of really supporting women and building their passion and going after their purpose and really defining their life's purpose and having the courage to step into it. And when COVID hit, we started, so Cara, you brought a conversation. You were like, I want to have more conversations about race and how we can be supporting the Black community, especially through COVID, which has disproportionately impacted the Black community. And so we were in conversations about that, but we were like, okay, so, you know, this is about purpose. And so that's kind of how it, you know, comes in. And then we just the Thursday before, we just looked at each other. We were like, this is the only conversation to have. Like, this is the only thing that is that needs, you know, this is the thing to talk about. So that's what we ended up, I listened. Yeah. So that was what we ended up talking about. I'm just so grateful for it. But Cara, how have you been this week, girl?
You know, this week was tough. This week was definitely tough. I probably echo a lot of the sentiments of a lot of the Black community and probably people in general, but especially the Black community. You know, it was very tough. It was sad. I mean, I was like, I had to create a space where I could just get some peace for myself and some self-care, because I literally would wake up and go to sleep, like literally either glued to my social media account, YouTube, looking at the headlines, you know, the news, talking to my close friends and family about things that they've been experiencing. But more than anything, while also taking it in and being like, holy crap, like these are my people, like this could have easily been me, or, you know, someone I love and someone I'm close to. Also, simultaneously, I really was like, how can I go into action? You know, how can I do my part? Like, and then also feeling rage, right? Feeling anger, feeling exhausted, because at the same time, I am a business owner and I have a network full of members, who, you know, it's a mix, a very diverse network of women. So one, how can I be of support for my Black members, but then also how can I, you know, let it be known to other members, you know, whether Latina, whether white members or whatever, what this space in this moment means, you know what I'm saying, for us, and how we can come together and what is going to be said in this space that's not going to be tolerated, you know, and how we can better just express how we're feeling. So it was a lot for me, I would say, because I felt like while I was dealing with it on my own and personally, I still felt I needed to show up for the people around me. It was definitely a very intense week. And it was also a week, you know, I think the week prior, a lot of that sadness and anger and just uncertainty and even fear consumes me. And then this week that passed, it was more about action. But then I did a lot of self-reflection too, which was interesting, especially leading up to the panel. I did a lot of self-reflection about my own Black experience and just being a Black woman growing up. And I spoke about some of this on the panel, but I lived in a Black neighborhood. I went to Black schools, high schools, and elementary schools. But when I got to college, I went to a predominantly white college. And a lot of times I found myself the only Black person in those rooms, and in those classrooms. And even going into the workforce, right? Going into corporate America, a lot of times I found myself the only Black person in some of those boardrooms and at those tables. And this past week, after really reviewing my own Black experience, I realized that in those moments, I was quiet a lot. I was like completely quiet. And, you know, I asked myself, why was you so quiet? Why were you so quiet? And as I dug a little deeper, I realized a number of things, but I was like, at the time, I felt fearful, you know, because maybe I felt like what I had to say didn't necessarily matter. Or, you know, if I said something, then they would override it and it wouldn't contribute to the conversation, you know? And so, or they would counter it and, you know, create a space for me to have to defend myself, thus turning into the angry Black woman, right? And so a lot of things, this week I was just thinking over my own Black experience for my entire life. And, you know, it was tough. I found myself sad in a lot of those moments where, like, wow, girl, why didn't you speak up? I found myself angry. So, yeah, it was an intense week for me, for sure. How about you? Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, you said the thing about, like, if, for you, a big shift was the realization that you could do something. Like, that's kind of what, like, started to shift the voice piece. Was there anything else, or was that, like, the main, what elicited that, would you say?
Yeah, I would say, for me, also looking at my own experience, my own Black experience over my life, I would say a big piece why I didn't speak up, and even in the face of injustice, right? When we've seen things happening throughout the years, you know, in moments where maybe I didn't speak up as loud as I'm speaking now in front of audiences, is because I felt like I didn't have power, you know what I'm saying? But more so in those rooms. So if I'm in those classrooms, if I'm in, you know, those if I'm in those classrooms and I'm in those spaces at work, I felt like I didn't have power. It was coming from a place of powerlessness, and I didn't feel like I had the weight to change it. So even if I did speak up, nothing would change. Even if I did speak up, it wouldn't be respected. And for me, this moment really was a huge shift for me in that space, because what's happening right now, and I think how everyone's banding together, and with social media now, and with me taking my leap and a lot of that courage, I realized that I'm powerful. So it's almost like a power shift. I was like, I feel more powerful in this space. And I feel like I have to step in from all of those years that I felt powerless. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't speak up in those spaces where I was the only Black person, and not even in the face of injustice, but even just in a marketing meeting, you know, speaking up and saying, I have ideas, I have something to contribute to this conversation that could change what's happening here. And so I think for me, over the last week, there's been a huge shift in me feeling more powerful in this space than I felt in the past. And so that revelation was really huge for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and I think I've kind of experienced something similar in that regard, where I was also doing a lot reflecting. I think one of the things for me that was really cool, and that I'm really just immensely grateful for, is that one of the indirect effects of the blackout was that I think, even as someone who's really committed to learning and to understanding other people's perspectives, even that added layer of stepping back and listening and stepping back and reflecting, for me, had me do a lot of, like, taking stock of how I'm showing up in this conversation, how I have shown up in this conversation, how, you know, my immediate community, my family, the people who I've predominantly been around for most of my life have shown up, and, like, what those dynamics look like. So you and I have talked quite a bit about backgrounds in psychology. So that's always the lens where I'm looking. I'm always looking through how people are thinking about things. And I also, for me, it's interesting because I've also played with this idea of voice a lot, and, like, why have I not used my voice? And it's interesting, right? It's like, for me, it was less powerlessness. And obviously, clearly, white women's experience is going to be a little bit different. looking at like the extent to which I think, and I don't think I'm unique in this, but I was taught to not disrupt things. Don't be disruptive. And so for me, I had a lot of emotion move through around that, because it's like anger on behalf of other people, hurt, sadness on behalf of other people, looking at moments where I haven't used my voice and that I'm ashamed of that.
Yeah.
Looking at all of those things, but also similar to you in the sense that, like, I think we look at those things and we've been looking at, wait, but something, I think we both are very much on the same page. There is something shifting here that is really palpable. Yeah. And I think everyone is feeling it. And it's horrible that it had to get here. I will lose my family or community if I speak out. Yeah, that's, and Christine's one of my mentors. Actually, Cara, you met Christine. She's in the comments. She said, I'll lose my family or community if I speak out. That's a really, like, that's how I felt. I was like, leading up to the panel, I was calling my parents. I was like, I don't know what's going to come flying out of my mouth, and it might hurt your feelings. Like, I don't know. And I think that for a lot of people, that fear is very, very real. And yet it's like, there's this enormous shift happening where it's like, finally people are paying attention and are having some of these really challenging conversations. And because of that, I also feel this enormous sense of hope that the tide is shifting.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that a little bit too, in terms of, like that feeling and that fear of, I will lose my family or community if I speak out. I want to dive into that a little bit. And so, with knowing that, like, how does that make you, like, right now, obviously, I know you've been having these conversations or started having these conversations this week, but before having these conversations, with that thought, how does that make you feel? Because, and I just want to know, as a human, right? Because, like, what you're speaking out about is absolutely right. And it's the truth. And it's real. And then a part of you is, so how does that, like, what is that internally? What does that feel like,
Yeah, great question. Shitty. but that's the short answer. But I think also there's this duality to it, right? Where it's uncomfortable and it's so necessary for us to look at how that's been getting in our way, and how, like, I think for me, and I can only speak through my experience, that in having some of these conversations with my immediate community, I know that I'm going to hit buttons. Like, I know there are going to be reactions. And my highest commitment is to help the people around me learn and see and empathize and see other perspectives. And I can be with a lot of trigger and a lot of stuff coming at me, if that's something that I can actually do. So that's a very strong motivator for me. And like, love and maintaining relationships is one of my highest priorities. And there's a point where I have to draw a boundary and say, if I'm going to lose these people because I'm standing up for what I believe in, like, I lost followers this weekend just through my stories. And I was kind of conflicted, because I was like, I want to be able to talk to these people, because I think that there's an opportunity to educate and to help people see the pain that's happening. And if you aren't committed to having that conversation with me, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this kind of like this commitment to relationship, this commitment to having those conversations, even when they're hard. And there's a point where if two parties aren't willing to be in that conversation together where they're learning, then there's nothing. It's like, you have to kind of hit a point where it's like, okay, they're going to be where they're going to be, and I'm going to stand where I'm going to stand, and that's not going to stop me from standing up for what I believe in. So, but it's uncomfortable. It's scary. It's triggering. But I think it's really, really necessary. I mean, Cara, how have you navigated some of those tough conversations?
Honestly, on my end, it hasn't been a tough conversation when it comes to race, because I am a Black woman. I think the toughest conversations that I've had is between you and I. You know what I'm saying? In a place of being a Black woman, you are a white woman. And I think for me, the toughest thing is when this really hit home, and it really, you know, when not even when the video was released, and then we started to think about the Black experience, probably the toughest thing for me is, what are my white friends going to do in this moment? And that was scary for me because, you know, whether it's friends, close friends, or whether it's acquaintances, whether it's colleagues, whether it's people that I just talked to on the phone, in this, it was like a defining moment. And it was almost like I was like holding my breath, because I'm almost was like, don't let me down, you know, but at the same time, everyone's trying to navigate it. But at the end of the day, it's a heart posture, right? And so even if you don't know what to do politically and how to go into action and how to change it, you can have a heart to say that, and you know, it's not right. And this is before the whole world began to stand with the Black community, before we started to see more and more displays of this. But when that video came out, it's like, nobody can deny this now. Nobody can deny this. So what are you gonna?
Oh my gosh, yes.
So what are you gonna say? And so I haven't had to have uncomfortable conversations in that regard, because everyone around me is Black, you know, and we're all empathizing with each other and experiencing the same thing. But the hardest conversations were the ones between you and I. But more than anything, when that video came out and the immediate hurt that I felt for my community and for myself, and then I was like, so what are other people going to do? You know, what are white people going to do in this moment, especially the ones who I associate with? And this was before we saw it, because, you know, now we're in a space where some people are speaking out, big corporations or whatever, because it's the thing to do, right? So now we're in a space where we're trying to figure out who's real here, or who's just trying to do it for clout. So in that moment, we didn't know if the whole world would stand with us. You know what I'm saying? In that moment. So I was just, it was very uncomfortable for me. I was almost like holding my breath, like, so who's going to stand with me in this, you know?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I had a really interesting conversation with, so, oh my gosh, there was so much in what you said. I think first off, most of my difficult conversations have not been with people who are like explicitly making racist comments. Like that for me is like a hard, like, okay, like we need to have a real conversation about this. Like I'm just completely, the hardest conversations for me have been, like I remember, so MLK has that beautiful famous quote about how the population who he feared the most was the white moderate. It's like the people who kind of say, I'm not a racist, and they don't really, they're not really willing to like really look and really do the work. So the hardest conversations for me have been with people who are like, I've got nothing against this. And it's like, there's something in their behavior and the way that they're showing up, in their implicit, like very subtle ways of showing up in the world that you see, that I think once you start really doing this work and like looking at yourself and looking at everything, that you start seeing, and it's like, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And actually being able to, that for me has been the most uncomfortable, but also the most, it feels like there's so much opportunity there too, because it's just like people just don't, a lot of times just aren't seeing things. Yep. And I think you're right. What's so interesting about the George Floyd situation is like, I had a couple conversations with members of my family where I was like, I was almost kind of tiptoeing in, like, I don't really know where you're going to fall on this. And they were like offended that I would even insinuate that. And it's because I'm pointing to all of these other subtle things that are happening in conversations where I'm like, I actually don't know where you stand because of other ways that you make comments about this movement.
Yeah.
And the George Floyd situation was so interesting because everyone was just unified in saying, this is so unacceptable. Yeah. This is so unacceptable. And it's like everyone is now looking at this incredibly clear situation. And I think it's opened the conversation. It's opened this opportunity to have conversations with people who think they're doing their due diligence, but actually need to go further.
Yeah.
And for me, that's a scary conversation because it often involves taking well-meaning people and saying, let's sit down and look at this really hard thing.
Yeah.
And kind of showing up with enough love to like hold their hand in it and be like, this is going to involve you looking at how your voting patterns, how your silence, how all of these things have had you be complicit and doing it yourself. And like, I think that's where that's really been a lot of my week, listening and having those conversations and trying to do my due diligence in my community. And yeah, it's like, it's very, very interesting. Well, and Cara, like you also mentioned the piece about voice, which I want to dive, actually, unless you have anything else, I can see your face, like you're processing.
Yeah, no, because it was something you said about people who aren't outwardly, or they aren't making racist comments. They're like, no, I'm not racist, or whatever the case is. But it's those subconscious things that are happening inside that you do on a daily basis that are adding to the oppression and what these systemic, things that are just out of order. And I want to speak to that because I was watching a conversation between a psychologist, and I forgot her name, Black woman, and this white woman. They were on a podcast, and she was talking about how they did a study. I think it was in 2016 or 2014. They did a study. They did two studies. One was with preschool teachers. Okay, and the preschool teachers, they had a video camera on 4 kids. It was a Black boy and a Black girl, a white little girl, and a white little boy. They had a video camera on them out in the playground or in the classroom, and they asked the teachers, and so the teachers went into this study without knowing that this was a study and what they were actually going to be looking for, right? And so they just said, go into this room, watch this camera, and it was actually done at Yale. The study was done at Yale, and they said, watch this camera, watch these kids, and keep an eye out for any negative or like bad behavior. Keep an eye out for any bad behavior. So the teachers are watching, and they had some like eye technology at Yale, and the technology picked up that the teachers, their eyes went to the Black boy first. Their eyes, when they were looking for negative and bad behavior, went directly to the Black little boy. And afterwards, it was revealed what this study was about and the results, and people were horrified, mortified, because they were like, oh my God, like, and so again, it goes back to some of those deep rooted subconscious things that have been embedded into our systems back into slavery when Black people were dehumanized, right? Like the fact that you could have slaves or own Black people or whatever is because you dehumanize them, right? They were 3/5 of a person. They weren't even an actual person. So that has been ingrained in our system. And again, slavery and of that time wasn't that long ago. It literally wasn't that long ago. We still have people now alive who were, a part of that whole kind of experience. And so what that study revealed was that even the people that you think are the most sensitive, preschool teachers who love everyone, who's the most nurturing and most caring, had that deep rooted thing where if I put you in a space and I say, look out for the negative or the bad behaviors, and the first place your eye goes to, or most of the time your eye is on the Black little boy, at the end of the day with kids, if you're looking at something long enough, you're going to find something wrong with it, right? And if you're not looking at the white little boy or the white little girl, then you're not going to see it. And so this is what's happening in the world, right? If you are a Black person and people are always looking at you and waiting for you to do something wrong, wait for you to mess up because they just believe that you're a part of the problem, then of course they're going to find something. But if they're not looking at anybody else, then of course they're not going to see it. And so to your point about having those conversations with people in your community who are not shouting racist comments, but ingrained in us, we do have, there are some things that are subconsciously coming up that are keeping the Black community and why we are, we have this uproar now. So that was very, very interesting to hear. Not interesting, but very powerful to hear you say that in doing your work over the last week.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's important to like highlight that there also is very explicit racism. There is also like, the subset of people who I'm talking about are like people who are, otherwise very step further. Cara. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Did I just like I just blacked out, didn't I?
You did. Yeah. It gave us like the spiral of doom. You're good. You're back though. You're back, girl. Yeah, and it's how you start having those conversations, how you start illuminating some of those more implicit biases. Like I used to, I don't know if we ever used to talk about this, but I taught this in psychology. I taught college psychology in grad school. And then I also taught bias training at my previous corporate job. And it was really interesting to have these conversations with people. And really the way that we framed it for everyone was like, it was a little irreverent, honestly, the way we'd open the conversation where we'd say, everyone's a little racist. Like everyone's got a little bit of this in them, and some people to a much greater degree. But it's like almost kind of by diffusing and saying this is something that touches everyone in some way, it makes it feel a little less threatening or shameful when you say, hey, you need to look at this. You need to look at how this shows up, get responsible for it, and see how you can do your due diligence to eliminate it. And I think the other piece that this week has made that's been made very clear in this week is like, y'all are having this, like, when I say y'all, I mean like the Black community has unfortunately been borne the brunt of this in leading the charge in initiating this conversation. And I think that what's amazing about this now and what needs to happen from here on out is that I think like we need partnership, and we need like white people need to start speaking up and need to start getting responsible for some of these things. Like this isn't just an issue in the Black community. This is something that like, if racism is something that's born in the white community, it's something that we need to look at and we need to get responsible for. So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what we've been echoing, for the past 2 weeks, that this is a partnership or it's a collaborative effort, right? And more so, like on the white community to now, because the white community is now seeing it as a large, right? I feel like the veil has been lifted, and it's like, holy crap, like, because it's something that we've been saying, something that we've been screaming about, something.
Yeah.
I'm back now.
Something's happening with your Wi-Fi, girl.
Yeah, you're back. Listen, I don't know what is going on over here. I'm good.
Trying to call you.
I'm good. So yeah.
What were you saying? Sorry, it's getting garbled. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me now or see me?
Now we're good.
Okay, good. No, I was saying, yeah, it's something we've been saying now, that it has to be a collaborative effort right now moving forward. So absolutely. So I would love to hear because I know earlier, just going back to the fear of like losing your community if you speak up and speak out and using your voice now, over the last week with you examining kind of your experience throughout the years, right? Because I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably the first time that you've been the most vocal and the most like strong in your stance about what's happening, right?
It's actually interesting that you say that.
Shed some light on that.
Yeah. So I've had very, very vocal moments. I was reflecting on this actually with my mother the other day, where I looked at her and I was like, this is the least combative I've ever been in one of these conversations. Like, this is because I think something for me shifted where I was like, there's something about me showing up in that, for me personally, when I show up in opposition to my mom pushes up against me. When I show up in opposition to anyone kind of shows up against me. So for me, there was like, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being mad. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just recognized that in a lot of those contexts, for me, it was getting in the way. So I'm being more intentional about the way that I'm showing up to the conversation, because for me, the intent is no longer to be right or provocative. The intent for me is to change people's minds. So I've gotten a little bit different in the way that I approach it. And I think now it's going to be more sustained for me. So you're right in that sense. It was just like a slight nuance, but keep going. You said you'd imagine that I've gotten more, like involved and, excited and, not excited, but passionate about this.
Yeah. No, so I was going to ask you, so if that was the case, but you just shed light that you've, been vocal about it before, but now it's, you being sustained about it. I know earlier someone mentioned, fear of losing your community or your family if you spoke up. But because you've been vocal about it before, my question may not necessarily apply, but I was going to ask, was that something that stopped you in the past from speaking up? But you said you spoke up about it before. So in terms of like sustaining this thought in this movement, I guess what's that turning point for you?
Yeah, so that's actually interesting, and it's actually related to what I said, which is that I think for me, I would show up and I'd wait to speak up until I was so fiery about it that someone in my life would go like, "Girl, you need to calm down," and then I'd get all pissed about it, like, "Mah," and I'd stop talking. And now I'm like, wait, no, how do I actually have a sustained, effective conversation about this? And so for me, like, exactly. So it's more like the intention has changed slightly, and I think it's more. For me personally, it's like, and I want to be really careful not to say that I don't think you can have a productive conversation if you're pissed off, because I'm also pissed off. It's just that I'm very cognizant of kind of like helping other people learn and kind of re-educating. But Cara, what about you? I know that you've even said like at times you've kind of kept your voice down or you haven't wanted to rock the boat. Like what's that look like for you?
Yeah. And, not in the face of injustice, but in the face of just speaking up as a Black woman. Right. And so like, as discussed earlier, a lot of times like in college or in my corporate career, I was the only Black person in those rooms. And so, just to kind of expand a little bit on that, it might be we're having a meeting about something and I silenced myself or didn't feel comfortable with speaking up in those spaces in fear of that it wouldn't be respected, it wouldn't contribute to anything, or I would then have to defend myself and thus being the angry Black woman in the office, right? And so I use it almost as a protection, or protection for myself, protection mechanism to be like, listen, let me just kind of be in this space, do my job, and leave. But for me, the turning point, and again, being young in my career, right? So, or young just in general, I was like in my early 20s when I was early 20s, like 19, 20 in college, graduating and going into the workforce and being in that space. So one, I had the insecurity of feeling very young in my career and still trying to learn the company, trying to learn what I'm doing. So I had that insecurity. Then I also had the insecurity, okay, now I'm a woman in a lot of these spaces where there's a lot of white men, okay? Then on top of that layer, I had the insecurity, or not the insecurity, but the space of, okay, now I'm a Black woman. So I'm young, I'm a woman, and I'm a Black woman. So just trying to figure out, one, how to navigate that space in corporate America. Two, being that in a lot of these spaces with some of the companies that I work for, I didn't see people that looked like me in those spaces to be the example for how you navigate that, right? And so at the time, social media wasn't crazy as it is now. So it wasn't easy to just pull up a powerful Black woman who we know in the industry and kind of see her life and hear her speak on IG Live or on her Instagram stories. It was literally, if you had these examples in your personal life, then you were good. But if you didn't, you had to figure that out on your own. And so that was me. Trying to figure out my way. Like and being in the industry, I was in the entertainment industry, marketing and advertising. And in that industry, for magazine companies, I worked for companies like 17 Magazine, which is predominantly, a white magazine. It doesn't highlight Black culture like an Essence would, or what I knew as my Black culture is what they interpreted it as, and so not having those examples also didn't help with me navigating that space. And so I would say for me, the turning point for me, especially in my career and just as a woman, was when I was hired to work at Essence Magazine, which is a magazine geared towards Black women. And being in that space, that was literally probably the first time that I had been up close and personal. I'm sorry, people are like calling me.
Okay.
That was like the first time that I had been up close and personal with powerful Black women calling the shots, running it. And again, the magazine is geared towards Black women. So seeing, you know, the beauty in that, seeing the power in that, using your voice, stepping up, being confident in your ideas, and so forth. And so that was that turning point for me. And I would say that I truly began to blossom in that space. And then after coming there, then I was like, with my job and my purpose and with my business now, I owe it to my community to continue using my voice, because there are Black women, young Black girls who are in the similar position that I was in, you know, a lot of times being the only Black woman in the class or being the only Black woman in the boardroom. And as a young girl, you need examples like that to help you navigate that. And so I was like, now I have to speak up and I have to use my voice. And so when examining that, I was angry at myself. Like this week, as I examined my Black experience in being the only Black person in those spaces, and I didn't use my voice, even if it was just for a marketing campaign. You know, it wasn't to fight injustice, but that is a hand in fighting injustice, because at the end of the day, if they know I'm going to come in that room and I'm going to speak up and I'm going to hold my own, then they, you know, it would create space for us. So yeah. You know, it's definitely been kind of an examination, I think, over the last week of my own Black experience, and, you know, just how I can use my voice more now to create space for us in those moments, even sometimes when we're the only Black people in the room.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious, so you said a couple things. You said that, like, having somebody who's like a few steps ahead of you, who you can identify with, who can kind of pave the way for you, or like use her voice and almost kind of like lift you up and be that role model, is really, really powerful, because that's what you really had at Essence. I'm also curious if you, Cara, there might be someone watching this at some point who's working for a predominantly white corporation, and she's feeling exactly how you just described feeling. Like, no one really looks like me. No one really gets me. I'm scared to speak up. You know, like, what if they you know, they could like brush me off for being too young. They could brush me off for being a woman. They could brush me off for being an African American. Like, there's so many things in my way. Like, and so having been there, what would you say to that person?
I would definitely say, you know, one, try and find, because it's easy for us to say, well, speak up, get over that fear and speak up. But it's not enough sometimes to do that, because yes, that is what we need to do. Speak up and use your voice anyway. But I would say be very intentional about seeking out those women, even if now we have access to social media, which is amazing, right? And social media or LinkedIn, I would say be very intentional about seeking those women and getting in touch with those women and being very transparent in your experience, you know, and saying, you know, I admire what you're doing, talk about their career, but also, you know, as a young Black woman, I see you. And, you know, I would just love to, you know, just be intentional in terms of like connecting with them. And so that you can start to build that relationship. But in that space right now, with what's happening in the world, people may be wondering, what can I do? You know, and I would say, you like, speak up, even if it's sending an email. If you don't feel comfortable speaking in a room or face to face, if it's literally just sending an email, basically expressing how you feel, like it's enough for it to be said. Even if it's messy, even if it isn't politically correct, even if you feel it's a little too emotional right now, right? Because I think even in my experience with the angry Black woman kind of stereotype and so forth, it was a way to silence us. It was a way to not make us feel that we were valid in our frustrations, not make us feel like our emotion mattered. And so because of that, I speak for myself as well, like I found myself being very strategic in how I speak up and how I respond to things, because I'm like, okay, I can't be too angry, but I can't be too frustrated, but I have these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say to this young Black girl in that space who feels too young, who feels, oh, because I'm a woman, oh, because I'm Black, I can't speak up, to honor your frustration. It's okay. Especially in this time, honor that. Do not feel like you have to censor that. And I'm telling you this, if you're watching, honor it. And even if you don't feel comfortable with speaking, write a letter. Mm-hmm. And in that letter or in that email, honor your emotion in that email. And but it's like, that's something that can happen now. But I would say then start to look for those examples, because there's so much power in those examples. And if anyone's watching, DM me. I am more than willing to help navigate. Like, I have tons of mentees and just young girls that I talk to on many different levels, whether it's professional, just navigating life or whatever. DM me, like, let's build, because I know that there is power in seeing that example. And that literally was the turning point for me. And I remember I was working at one company that I won't name, but I was working at a company, a very well-known publishing company. And I was like, the only one of very few Black people in the company. And I remember seeing this woman, she was like, I think VP of marketing, Black woman, very powerful, and like just walking up and down the hall and just like owning it and being in her skin. And I was like, I used to just watch her every day. And I'm like, wow, like just amazed by this woman. And so one day, her along with a few others, but I emailed her and I was like, hey, I love what you're doing. I admire you. I would love to just take some time to just talk, if you have 30 minutes, to just hear about your experience, and just learn as I navigate my own career. And I think I was an intern at the time, as I navigate my own career. And she was more than happy to sit down with me and have those conversations. And so I would say just be very intentional about seeking out those people. But right now, honor your emotions and don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, and I think also it's so easy. I love what you just said, because it's like, first off, making those connections. I also think that speaks to, if you're the woman, and if you're another woman in the room, even if you're not a woman of color, or even if you don't, like, knowing now, having that perspective and understanding, and I think a lot of women like know this, but it makes it more explicit. Lift other women up in that room.
Yeah.
Ask the quiet person what she thinks.
Yes.
Like actually enable that conversation. Notice women are incredibly perceptive, and it's like, use that superpower to notice when somebody's not speaking up. Be intentional about pulling diverse perspectives in. Be the person who's facilitating those conversations. I think too often it's the pressure and responsibility. Like in that seat, Cara, you felt all of this pressure to be like, speak up. I need to be the one to speak up. Why can't I speak up? There's no space to speak up. And it's like, I think that's where other women, even men, can do this. Pull people in. Like, pull people in conversation. This is why it's so important to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think I love the other thing you said, because you said that when you were looking back at your career, you were like, I kept kind of beating myself up for moments where I didn't speak up. Like, there's shame around it. Like, I should have been braver. This is the part, Sax said this in the comments, like, it's going to be messy. There are going to be moments where you miss an opportunity and you're like, I cannot believe I just froze. I can't believe I didn't say anything. And it's like, keep at it. Keep the intention of doing this work strong. And then along the way, as you falter, be committed to learning from those things, but also be really kind to yourself. Like, the thing that we're talking about doing is not easy. Like, Cara, being a Black woman in a room filled with white men who's young and being like, this is what I think, is scary as hell. And you're not going to get it right the first time. And that's okay. So, yeah, that's what I think based off of what you said. And thank you for sharing that too. That's like, I feel like that's so important to hear those voices and that perspective of like what it's like to be sitting in that seat.
Yeah, no, and like I said, this past week has really reminded me of my Black experience in those spaces. I found myself in those spaces a lot, and as much as, and I was like, you know, sad thinking about that young woman in that space that felt insecure because of her skin color, or because of her gender, or because she was young. And I was super sad, but then it also made me, empowered me, because I said, you know what, I have the opportunity to change that now for anyone else who feels, you know, kind of insecure in those spaces. You know, I think like moving forward, and to your point, like I think that's something that we can do in a very active way as we continue to take action in this space. And that's just one thing with dismantling this injustice and these things that we see in this, you know, this racism space, because when you see moments where someone isn't speaking up, you have an insight to why they may not be speaking up. And it's not always because they don't have anything to say. Right. So these conversations are super powerful. So if we have any VPs or power people in power on the line, or people who have employees or who have a staff, it's not, and especially if they're of color, especially if they're women, and you examine your room and it's not a diverse room, it's not an inclusive room, they're quiet, not because they don't have something to say. Sometimes that may be the case, but a lot of times it's something else. So really being mindful of that. And even if you don't call them out in the room, have a conversation with them, check in with them, and let them know that they are being seen. Because I think in those rooms too, it's almost like, well, it doesn't matter whether I'm here or not. You know what I'm saying? But if you have someone who can call you out, who can say your name, or after the meeting, say, how can I better support you? How can I help you feel more comfortable? Then you're being seen, and you're adding to the change that we wish to see. You know what I'm saying? I think it's so much power in just being seen. So.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
Cara,
I guess.
Oh no, go ahead. Do we have I was gonna ask what's next, but what do we have on the? Are we
what's next? Let's talk about what's next, because I know it's 10:53. I know Instagram only gives us an hour on these things, so I don't want to get cut off. But I think for me, what's next, and what I could say is, you know, probably like 3 things come up for me is building our own, and I said this on the panel on Tuesday, but building our capacity for discomfort. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. We want to run away from it. We don't want to engage in the conversations. And I know someone else said in the comments that, it's messy. It's okay to be messy. And you're not going to always get it right. And if you mess up or whatever, and someone calls you out, you fix it, you apologize for it, and then you keep going, and you keep being better, right? And you learn from it. And so I would say building our capacity for discomfort, acknowledging and validating the pain and the sadness, right? So I would say that's another thing, like moving forward, like let's acknowledge it, let's validate, let's knock down that space where people don't feel comfortable to be frustrated, people don't feel comfortable with being angry, and let's again say, I see you and I feel you, how can I support? So I would say that's another thing. And then for me, you know, I'm committed to taking action and never ever letting up. You know, I've devoted my life to helping women, specifically Black women, make more money. And whether it's going into entrepreneurship or creating additional stream of income with Pretty Passionate in the LEAD program, so that we can experience true freedom. Because as we know, with wealth, you can fund the change, right? So we can speak about it, we can take action, but when you have money, you can actually fund the change, and we can hire better lawyers to fight for justice. We can create programs and systems that support what's happening, or that creates spaces for conversations like this to happen when you have wealth. And so I'm committed to continuing to do my work with Pretty Passionate and with the women that I speak to, so that we can all step into that space of true freedom, and not only speak about and be the change we want to see, but also fund the change that we want to see. So, you know, and I guess for you, Lauren, what are like some takeaways for you? We're at 10:56, so we got like 4 minutes.
Oh yeah. So for me, I think it's kind of this parallel of doing my own work and then also trying to support other people in doing theirs. I think generally speaking, like, so for myself, I'm just super committed to continuing to learn about this. and
Mm-hmm.
see how I can be supportive to the movement. And so for me, a lot of it is like doing more reading, having more challenging conversations, practicing, like really practicing using my voice. And
Mm-hmm.
then also like, but I also think that there's this element of, you know, we can talk about it until we're blue in the face. We got to start doing stuff. Like we need
Yep.
to start actually, like, whether it's protesting or looking at, you know, like changing the way we vote, or, you know, like donations or different types of like involvement in these actual movements. Like these are things we actually need to start putting our money where our mouth is and start actively like working towards things. I think for me, a lot of where my attention has been is on these little conversations with people, because
Yeah.
I'm for the most part, you know, I went to a very conservative college. I like politically conservative college. I grew up in a pretty conservative neighborhood, so I'm connected to a lot of people with very large blind spots, and I'm
Mm.
also an educator, and I have a background in psychology, and this is sort of something that I've dedicated my life to. So I'm really dedicated to expanding my capacity to have some of these challenging conversations, because I think that a lot of times it's so easy in this conversation to um, write off people who disagree with you, and how I can actually start facilitating some of that learning. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm looking at, among other things. And
Right.
I'm just so excited to be involved in this with you. So
Yeah. No, same here. Same here. I think there's, there's power in, like you said, having these conversations, unpacking it so that we get into the thought process of a lot of things. Because again, it's easy to see on the surface. It's like, oh, I have this great company. There's no racism here. There's no one feeling oppressed here. There's no one feeling uncomfortable here. We love each other. There's a lot underneath the surface, and that's just in a corporate setting, so there's space to explore that in any and every setting in life. So this is great. I'm excited to be on this journey. We're all learning, right? And I'm excited to be on this with you, Lauren, and just for you standing with us, with the Black community, but then also us making a commitment to, it starts here with the Black community. Let's get this right, and then we continue to stand with each other for a lifetime, whether it's on women's issues, whether it's on any other issues that is happening in our world. And so this is great. I'm excited. Thanks guys for the encouragement in the chat box. I see Joy saying yes, this is great. I see a lot of encouragement, so thanks so much, guys. It's, as we say, and I think someone mentioned earlier, it's messy and it's an intimidating space, but this is where it starts, and it's okay. Like, let's talk, let's learn, let's build. So
thanks everyone
cool.
for coming. Thanks, Cara.
Yes, we have 1 minute, so that's it for today, guys. I will see you guys on Instagram. Bye. Have a great week, guys.